All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. I am back here on on the 17th, which is St. Patrick's Day, with Ryan Shanahan, of course, because the Shanahans are obviously uh, Irish, right? Isn't that correct?
Yep, we sure are. Yeah.
Okay.
Got my
Well,
Irish colors on today.
yes, and he's wearing green. I am not because I forgot. So I'm sorry, you guys, but but anyway, today we're going to be discussing some very interesting things with Ryan. Why don't you go ahead and introduce these topics for us, Ryan?
Sure thing. Seth, it's great to be back.
Yeah.
This topic is one that I think helps us understand the second coming a little bit better. And you've done some great videos recently on that subject.
Uh-huh.
So it's nice to dive in a little bit more and maybe cover some alternative facets that generally don't get considered very often. And in my undergraduate studies, I took philosophy classes, and I really enjoyed those. And that got me excited about topics like metaphysics, which is the study of nature, the study of reality. And we're going to get into some metaphysical topics here, but really I want to share a bunch of early church history stories with you, some from pioneer journals, from missionary journals. And we're going to have some fun talking about the spiritual aspects that affect our lives,
Yeah.
and may have a much bigger impact on the world than we generally are aware.
Yeah. So you have we have some ghost stories, we have some like positive ghost stories, some uplifting ghost stories, and then we have some scary ghost stories. And Ryan
Truly,
says that some of the most scary ghost stories are actually from Latter-day Saints because they actually happen to
yeah.
be real. So,
Yep. I've
uh,
often said Latter-day Saints have some of the best ghost stories of both kinds
mhm.
that there are in the world, and I think that should be explored more often.
Yeah. So metaphysics, Ryan. So for those of those people in the audience who don't know what metaphysics are, like metaphysics, would you say it's kind of like the study of the underlying reality, like beyond
Exactly.
reality, because meta means like beyond, right? So it's like
Yeah,
the underpinnings of reality. Is that kind of what it is?
for sure. In every aspect. If you've got a theory, an idea about what makes up our world, how the world was created, what shapes or changes the world around us, that all falls into the realm of metaphysics.
Hmm.
As well as some other out topics of philosophy. But for our purposes, we just want to know how is the world going to change at the second coming, and what does the presence of Jesus Christ on the earth actually do to the earth,
Good
right?
questions. Yeah.
Because we have that great scripture from Isaiah 11:6. It suggests the wolf shall lie down with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them.
Hmm.
There's more to that verse, of course, but those are the highlights, I think. And it suggests, okay, at the second coming, when Christ's presence is on the earth, these aggressive animals won't harm anyone, and even a little child will be able to lead them. That's interesting. That's exciting. So what is it that causes this great change, this metaphysical change within the animals? And
Right.
is it just the animals, or is it more? Because you remember in Genesis, at the fall, Adam and Eve, as they left the garden, they're told that the earth will no longer produce fruits spontaneously, but it would instead produce thorns and briars
Hmm.
to afflict and torment man. Now, this suggests that there is a nature to our reality that shifts within its presence or alignment with God.
Yeah. Yeah. So the idea is that because, for example, the lion will lay down with the lamb, that's something that's not in their nature right now. And so that means that some sort of a spiritual change must happen, which then
Mhm.
changes the reality that we see. Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I have a really good segue into talking about, to introducing that change. And we're going to do it with a fox breeding experiment from
Hmm.
Russia in the 1960s.
Okay.
Some may be familiar with this. This is such a cool experiment. So there was this researcher, geneticist, Dmitry Belyaev.
Hmm.
He wanted to understand domestication. And so he took a bunch of wild foxes, mainly silver foxes, is my understanding, from Russia. They're these beautiful black shimmering fur, beautiful foxes. But he took these foxes and he bred them according to how friendly they were. So the nicer the fox was, the more willing to have your hand next to it, things like that. He would breed these foxes. And this experiment is still ongoing. It's been going on all this time. But he found that within 10 generations, they already began to see major changes. In fact, these foxes became more friendly, more playful over time. And they also started to exhibit physical changes. Their fur changed. They became spotted, and their ears even became floppy, just like modern dogs.
Yeah.
Now they wanted to understand, okay, what is causing this genetic expression to exhibit this way? What causes this change? And one of the main differences they found in the blood work of these foxes is that they have more oxytocin going on in their system, right? Okay. Now, oxytocin is said to be the bonding hormone. It's the hormone that bonds couples together. It bonds children to parents as well, parents to children. So it's also identified as the love hormone. The implication is wild here because it suggests that love literally changes reality and literally changes us physically.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Now, when we have Christ return, how does that change the world? How does that reshape reality? We know that there's this change from a telestial world to a terrestrial world, and we don't often talk about the physical changes that entails. But I think this is a good way to highlight it. Christ is full of love, right? And I mean, you just look at any kind of like near-death experience video, and you've done some recently on that too. They're always talking about how there's so much love on the other side of the veil. And if that love is brought to our world, this fallen world, it's going to reshape reality, right? Because having love on the earth actually changes things. And there's the fox breeding experiment isn't the only way I can illustrate this. I've got another one for you. There's a researcher, Japanese researcher, Masaru Emoto. And some people might be familiar with this one too, but I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't heard of it. He has this famous water crystal experiment. Now, a lot of his work has been relegated to pseudoscience. That's fair. So we'll get that right off the bat. But that isn't to say that there isn't possibly merit in these types of studies, because these researchers tend to be atheists. I don't actually know what the belief systems of these particular researchers are, but they generally tend to be atheistic, and so they don't consider things outside of their sphere of study. They have an expertise in something and they just get focused on that, and they get this tunnel vision, not realizing that maybe they're hinting at something on a bigger scale, and they tend to avoid connecting the spiritual, unfortunately. Now, if you're somebody like Brigham Young, who taught that in school you shouldn't even teach the alphabet without the spirit, well, that really changes things, doesn't it? Right? Yeah. We were setting up BYU. There was a heavy push for removing secularism from studies and connecting the idea that our studies in the world are just a fraction of what God science is, but that they're the same thing. They're not separate. They are the same thing and of the same substance, and all inspiration and all good things come from God. And the closer we align with him as we prepare our minds, both physically for the study and spiritually, we can receive greater light and knowledge that changes the world in all kinds of ways. And as you know from my previous interviews with you, talking about the book, The Saints Who Built America, I have compiled a 600-page list of receipts of how Latter-day Saints have change the world for the better with innovations, technologies, and sciences
Yeah.
greater than any other organized group of people on Earth.
Well, yes, and I think that so one of the things that you say in your book so often is that even though Latter-day Saints are a minority in the United States, we still have had a disproportionate impact on things like science and innovation in technology, in medicine even. And I thought that that was so unique and interesting as we're talking about this in our culture to try to change the culture and that surrounds how people talk about the Latter-day Saints. And I think that one of the reasons, Ryan, why Latter-day Saints might be such a powerful influence on the world is because we have a different way of viewing metaphysics. We view the
Exactly.
spiritual and the physical as connected, not two separate
Exactly.
things, not even like two, well, I don't know, maybe you could say that we do view it as like two, like the different sides of the same coin, but maybe even
Mhm.
it's closer than that. Maybe we think it's like it's pretty much the same thing. Like there's no commandment, for example, in the Doctrine and Covenants it says that God gives that's only spiritual or only temporal. They're always both spiritual and temporal.
Yep, they can never be
That's
fully separated.
yes.
Yeah. And
And
it
also that spirit isn't just some immaterial thing. That spirit is actually matter, just more fine and pure, and we can't actually see it because of that.
exactly.
So
I'm glad you brought that up. So
yeah.
that gets into the research by uh, Cleon Skousen. He did some great work on this. He talked about this definition where intelligence is spirit and spirit is matter refined.
Hmm.
All energy is spirit. And so, and we understand this in physics that you can't destroy matter and you can't create matter.
Right.
It's eternal, but it just exists in different forms.
Hmm.
And that's also the state of the change within our spiritual understanding of things. The world moving from a celestial to a terrestrial and eventually receiving its paradisical glory as a celestial world. These are actually describing physical changes that happen
Hmm.
on the earth, in the earth, and of the earth. And this includes of our bodies,
Yeah.
which mirror that change
And
over
on the
time
earth,
as we
which is
progress.
something that's also so unique about our religion, is that heaven is on earth. We're building it here on earth, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, while people do die, we have this place that's called the spirit realm, right? But the spirit realm is all around us. It's here on earth. It's not like out in the mysterious beyond. It's actually here on earth, which is
Mhm.
very unique, I think. And it's going to be a physical reality. The heaven on earth will be a physical, everybody will have bodies. It will be here on earth, a changed earth.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that gets into some of the stories we're going to share as we move on.
Okay.
But it shows that these are everything is eternal. Everything progresses. There's no end, right?
Yeah.
It just everything continues, but in different states.
Okay.
And that of course gets into what Kweku was getting about over this last weekend on Ascended Masters.
Hmm.
He's talking about the same things, these same metaphysical principles, but it just from a different way. It's another facet of the same understanding, and that this idea that some people who have overcome the world through Christ, they continue their work that was here on the earth in the next life. So they're still helping us in the next life, and they're known as ascended masters, according to
Hmm.
what he was saying. But I suppose to get back to Emoto and his
Right.
water crystal experiment. But
Absolutely.
Emoto's work suggested that water crystals would form different patterns according to the words, emotions, and intentions that you project onto it.
Hmm.
Well, the human body is over 70% water.
Hmm.
And if our intention, emotions, um, and even words actually have an impact on physical reality around us, well, then what does that say for how we act about towards people around us? Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue."
Hmm.
It's an interesting idea, right?
Yeah.
So Emoto has some interesting pictures. He did a book on this, and I've got a few of those that I've shared with you. And things like kindness and love and beauty, they create these beautiful water crystals, these little snowflake type
Yeah.
geometries.
Hmm.
But conversely, if there is negative intention, negative words, they form misshapen crystals and deformed crystals, or just they don't form properly at all.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And they're kind of ugly.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So there's an idea for you. There's something to consider.
Yeah, that's very interesting. This idea, again, going back to the concept that the spiritual is impacting the physical world
Exactly.
in ways that are inextricable, maybe. So, yeah, that's really
Yep.
interesting.
Now this gets into the converse understanding of what we get from Isaiah when we're talking about the second coming and how the world will change for the better. It suggests then that there is an opposite, and that our fallen world and its state it's in, with briars and thorns that it produces spontaneously to afflict us,
Hmm.
may have a connection to negative spirits.
Hmm.
Now, this really makes us think. Now, there's a third of the host of heaven fell, and where'd they go? They came here to this world, and
Hmm.
they're here among us, and they've had thousands of years to just sit around doing whatever. And who knows how much of the world has been populated much of that time. You think all those spirits are just hanging out with the aspects of mankind and civilization that are here? Or are they influencing all corners of the earth? And over those courses of thousands of years, are there negative energies, those negative emotions and intentions that they have? Are they impacting the world? Maybe instead of a friendly, cuddly, cute-looking fox, you get a terrifying wolf, or other creatures that look terrifying and do aggressive things that you have to be very careful about. Could they actually be creating these creatures and making them more aggressive, more frightening to be around?
Well, that's a good possibility, especially when we're going to be considering these ghost stories that you're going to be telling us. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
But I think it's interesting to look at, because even with ourselves, I think, didn't you early on do a topic on Latter-day Saints and how they tend to be more beautiful?
Yes.
Latter-day Saints are more beautiful,
Yeah, we
right?
discussed the reasons why Mormons are so hot.
Yeah, right. So yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Well, that's a pretty common phenomenon that tends to be
Yeah, it's one
tends
of
to
the
be
most
known.
searched terms on Google is why are Mormons
Right.
hot?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And members tend to be able to recognize other members just out
Mhm.
in a crowd. They can kind of pick them out.
Yes.
It's because there's a connection there. This kind of gets into also another one of these other metaphysical theories, and I want to introduce you to Rupert Sheldrake briefly and
Hmm.
his morphic resonance field theory. And I
Okay.
have to say, this has been one of my favorite subjects, because again, even though it's relegated to pseudoscience, it has some interesting points. And the tenets of the theory are this: it suggests that consciousness, emotions, and habits create an invisible energy field that influences all life.
Hmm. Okay.
And we might suggest that the Bible speaks of similar phenomena regarding sin and righteousness. I think it was even actually, maybe you can help me out with this. I've heard this quote that attributed to Joseph Smith, but I don't think he actually said it. But he said things that supported the idea, and it's this: that sin retards the mind.
Oh, I haven't heard that one, but
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense because I mean, if we're theorizing here that the spirit is intelligence, then if you lose the spirit, then you don't have that same intelligence. So,
Exactly, yeah. So I find that interesting. It's fun to think about. Sheldrake's theories are pretty broad-based. They cover a lot of different things. This idea of a shared memory within nature.
hmm.
He was a biologist, so you consider like how turtles and fish return to the same beach or stream for spawning. Um, Birds fly in a common migratory pattern. Butterflies, even though they may be 3 generations removed, from the birthplace of their grandparent return to the same nesting place.
Yeah.
And it's this cycle across Mexico to Canada and California that goes on like a 3-year cycle. It's this amazing phenomenon. Nobody can really explain how these creatures are able to just instinctively know what to do, where to go, and end up in the right place every time. But yet they do. So this idea of a shared memory isn't so out there. And it gets further because we have other phenomena too. The idea that people are able to learn something faster than a previous generation who first learned it. Giving an example, back in the early 20th century when they were coming out with IQ tests, they got a baseline of IQ levels, but as time went on and generations passed, there's been a 30% increase in IQ levels according to these tests. However, there's been no indication that humans are actually 30% more intelligent. Instead, it's just that the test has become easier to take. And how does that happen? Right? Yeah. Shared consciousness, right? This morphic resonance field that seems to impact reality and people, consciousness, intelligence, understanding on a generational basis, right? Genetic memory. Or you can even think of something as simple as the idea that you can know when somebody's staring at you, right? You can feel it.
Yes.
Right. You and this has been studied. I think Mythbusters once did a show just about that. I think they found that it's possible, probable.
It's probable.
It's what they came up with. Probable.
Yeah.
That people seem to be aware. There's an intention when you're staring at somebody, and they're able to pick up on that somehow. Some people, sometimes, maybe. Well, I think Sheldrake was on to something, but again, he was focused on the biology and not thinking about the spiritual. And so I've revamped his understanding, and it's something I like to call the IRF, the intelligence resonance field.
Okay.
And this is just my take on it, but it suggests that intelligence, according to Skousen, is spirit, and spirit is matter refined. So whenever we say intelligence, we're actually talking about the spiritual world. So intelligence resonance field, right? This idea that things aren't just a genetic memory, but there is something beyond that, and a higher intelligence influencing things from the spiritual realm. And that gets into our stories.
Okay.
So if you stayed with us this long, thank you.
Yeah.
That was the interlude. So let's see if we can have some fun with this. Yeah. Here's a fun story. I think this is a good one to kind of give us a baseline of multiple understandings. And this comes from the Young Women's Journal, Volume 6, Number 1, from October 1894, page 467. Okay. And it's on the prophet and old houses. So I'll read this story to you. When the saints moved to Nauvoo, it might be called a deserted town, as there were many empty houses, mostly built of logs, and had stood so long that the mud had fallen from the spaces between them. The saints, just driven from Missouri, were glad to get such shelter as those old houses would afford, and they were all soon filled, sometimes 2 and 3 families in one house. Some houses had no floors, some no doors. Soon the inmates became sick. Sickness increased until Joseph began to be alarmed and saw something very unusual in the new affliction. He looked into the matter as only a seer and prophet could look. He saw the trouble and where it came from. Those houses had been dens of iniquity. He instituted means to empty them again by moving the people into tents and doubling up families in better houses. O.B. Huntington notes, my father's family he took into his own house and tent, and says, I once heard him say concerning houses that had been inhabited by wicked people, that before the saints moved into them, they should be thoroughly cleansed. Afterwards, there should be a season of prayer in the house, and it should be dedicated unto the Lord for the use they designed it. Those old houses had been owned or occupied by wicked, unprincipled men, gamblers, outlaws, licentious robbers, etc. And those that were of the same stamp had met there there for evil practices and criminal purposes, and there carried out their orgies. While this was the pastime or work of men and women in bodies, disembodied spirits of the same ilk stood around in highest glee, and in various ways manifested to one another their enjoyment of the performance of the vilest of sins. When the owners or occupants of the houses were dead, they enjoyed each other's society with their new pals in the spirit state. And when the righteous took possession of their old houses, all combined to kill the new inhabitants, and hence so much sickness. For all evil spirits, whether in the body or out of the body, are opposed to this work and this people, and the spirits in the spirit world have means by which they can affect people on earth, and are as delighted there as here to do good or evil.
Interesting.
Fantastic, huh?
Yes. Now, just to be clear, though, because while this is true, what Joseph Smith is saying, right, it's also true that they probably understood the connection between the mosquitoes and the outbreaks of malaria that were going on. They're not saying that the only reason why the people are getting sick is because of spirits. They understood the connection between the swamplands and the mosquitoes to the malaria.
Very much so. And that's good to make that distinction. Joseph does have another quote where he is cited as saying, not all disease comes from the spirit world. And there's specific stories that highlight distinctions. In fact, I have one here from Brigham Young at winter quarters. And this is a good one. It's a short one. Winter quarters in 1846 says, Young dealt with a widespread phenomenon that caused illness and many accidents that harmed and afflicted the pioneers. There were even some deaths as a result of these accidents. He says, after prayer, Young discerned the cause and addressed the community. He learned through spiritual witness that the land they temporarily inhabited had been cursed by the spirits of its previous occupants. He said, you will learn that the wicked disembodied spirits have not left this people, though the most of those wicked persons who sought to destroy the saints have left us. There are myriads of disembodied evil spirits, those who have long ago laid down their bodies here and in the regions round about, among and around us. And they are trying to make us and our children sick, and are trying to destroy us and to tempt us to evil. It's from Journal of Discourses, number 6. But this is, I think, well connected to the account of the Logan Temple, where a devil and his a myriad of spirits that followed him came up to the temple grounds of the Logan Temple once, and the president of the temple met them and spoke with this devil, who said, we don't like the work going on here, and you must stop it. He said, no, the work will not stop, and what you're doing is futile. The work of the Lord will continue. And this devil then said to him, I'll tell you what we will do. We will go into this community, into this valley, and we will cause delays. We will cause accidents. We will cause people to be so engaged in toil that they won't be able to think about the temple or have time to go to the temple. And the account, and this is in a book about the Logan Temple spiritual experiences. And you can read this online. It's easy to look up. It says that they actually had a very marked decrease in temple attendance, and they almost felt like they could close Logan Temple because there just wasn't enough activity. And this went on for years. And the stories went on from the community saying that anytime they wanted to go to the temple, they had a really hard time doing so. There would be accidents, there would be problems, things that would work one way normally one day would be a disaster the next day, and then perfectly fine the day after, things like that. There's things not working properly.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And it just highlights again this connection between, the spiritual realm and the physical realm. It's really, really fascinating in a variety of ways, because it's like, I don't know, it's like teaching us that. So it's like, yes, they understand on one hand, that there's naturalistic explanations for these things, but also there's a spiritual component to them, which is really interesting.
Always.
Yeah.
And we should, as Latter-day Saints, I think it's important we always consider that there's a spiritual connection with everything that we do in life. right?
Yeah.
And this is, of course, the understanding of prophets and apostles for generations too. I think
Yeah.
they all teach this, that there is always that connection.
I mean, Jared from Christian Homestead actually had a really interesting episode a while ago. It was a few weeks ago, where he told a story about how his son was having some problems, and Jared blessed him, to that if there were any influences of negative spirits around, and then his son's condition improved.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I mean, yes, there's naturalistic explanations for that, but also there's a spiritual component as well. So, I don't know.
absolutely.
It's really interesting to consider all of this stuff.
Yeah, and it's so fun. And there are so many of these stories in church history that you could dive into. You could go down rabbit holes for days talking
Hmm.
about these things. And I suppose that's a good segue to continue. Of course, one of the most famous stories like this is about Joseph Smith and his first vision,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because before he met the Father and the Son to answer his prayer, something else happened. And I wonder how many Latter-day Saints today are reading that full history contained in Joseph Smith history in the back of the scriptures.
Yeah, I know. Some missionaries would just skip that part when they were reading the first account, or the Joseph Smith's account to investigators. They would just skip right
Yeah,
over
we
that. I never
often do.
did, but
Oh, okay, nice.
I know that
I know
some
I
people
did.
do. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of scary, and
Mhm.
I think there's this fear that reading that kind of stuff to investigators might put them off of the church, but I think that it's important for people to be aware of these things, because
Mhm.
what we would see a lot of times with investigators is, as soon as we left, you'd have people, coming up to them and say, "Oh, the missionary," and then they'd tell these nasty stories about the Mormons, right? And then their pastor
Yeah.
would show up just all of a sudden, for no reason, and they'd, and just, there's spiritual forces out there. Like, we're in a
Hmm.
spiritual
Hmm.
battle. It's not like, people needed to be aware of that, in my opinion, so that they
Definitely, I
could
think so
guard
too.
against it. If they were interested in the church and investigating, they need to be aware that there's a negative side to, spiritual warfare. So,
Very much, yeah.
yeah.
So maybe I'll take another one then, from Heber C. Kimball.
Hmm.
He, Kimball was part of the first troop of missionaries outside of the United States, and they went to England in 1837. They had some interesting experiences there. It says, the account goes, while serving the mission in England, Kimball was violently attacked by a dark demonic presence.
Hmm.
He and other missionaries were paralyzed. It was very similar to Joseph's experience right before he exerted his energies to pray to God and ask for deliverance in the name of Christ, and then saw the Father and the Son. But in this case, for Kimball, they him and he had 7 companions. They were paralyzed as the entity filled the room with darkness.
Hmm.
It struck Heber and his companions, causing physical pain. He described it as a battle with legions of devils trying to halt their missionary work. This was actually happened the day before the first baptisms in England.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If people don't think that there's demons that are trying to stop the missionary work, I mean, that's proof right there that there is something going on. So,
Yeah. Hmm. Definitely. And I served my mission in the Las Vegas East Mission,
mhm.
and had my own interesting experiences out there that
Yeah.
weren't always fun, as you can imagine. So
You want to go
most, I
into
think,
that a little bit, or is that too much
sure,
of a
I can share
tangent?
a little bit. Just you'll find commonalities within many missionary stories, both from the 19th and 20th century and today, of encounters with sometimes shadowy figures
Mm.
in a room, or having nightmares, particularly bad nightmares, ones that you don't normally have, that seem completely out of place and not characteristic of your usual of your usual dreaming.
Hmm.
I've had those experiences on my mission,
Yeah. Mm.
and I'm not alone. I can say, and so we've got a lot of these stories here. let's see. But they affect all realms. And I like this one. This one's interesting, from a pioneer woman in the 1850s. So as they're crossing the plains, you have a lot of different kinds of spiritual experiences, both of the good kind and the negative kind, on those plains, on that journey from winter quarters across to the Salt Lake Valley. In this experience, a pioneer woman awoke to see a shadowy figure standing over her. It whispered terrible things, filled her with fear and doubt about the journey. She was unable to move in this. It was almost like what you called a sleep paralysis kind of a situation. But she said, she says a silent prayer for Jesus Christ to help, and the figure suddenly vanished. She later testified that faith and prayer were the only defenses against such forces. And we can go even further. The demon that made Wilford Woodruff sick, from his own journal in 1870, while traveling, Wilford Woodruff suddenly felt deathly ill without any apparent cause. As he prayed for relief, he saw in a vision that a dark demonic figure was standing over him, pressing on his chest. He commanded the spirit to leave in the name of Jesus Christ, and immediately his sickness vanished. And again, another, the feeling of darkness before a missionary left a home. This is 1990s in Africa. A pair of missionaries entered a home where they were about to give a discussion, but both suddenly felt overwhelming dread and nausea. They knew something was wrong spiritually, so they left immediately. Later, they learned that the people in the home had been planning to do them harm.
Wow.
Yeah. And then finally, I have one more from the life of Heber C. Kimball. An experience that took place at Far West in a house that Joseph had purchased, which had been formerly occupied as a public house by some, as he says, wicked people. A short time after he got into it, one of his children was taken very sick. He laid his hands upon the child, and the child recovered. But as soon as he went outdoors, the child was taken sick again. Joseph administered to the child, and it recovered. This occurred several times. When Joseph inquired of the Lord what it all meant, then a vision opened to him, and he saw the devil in person, who contended with Joseph face to face for some time. He says, the devil spoke that it was his house and that Joseph didn't have any right there. And Joseph rebuked the devil and said, in the name of the Lord, to depart. And the child never had a problem again of this nature.
Wow.
Yeah. So with that,
again,
we've covered
that
some
we don't
dark
typically
stuff.
talk about, but
Exactly,
nevertheless,
yeah.
they're still important because, again, just if you're gonna skip over that part in the first vision account, you're just ignoring the facts that, there's
Exactly, yeah.
there's two different aspects to this. But now we're going to talk about the other aspects, the good aspects that you wanted to discuss.
Exactly. Yeah, this will a good palate cleanser, if you will. Right? We've talked about some dark stuff, so let's liven it up a bit. And I'm glad that you folks are sticking around with us to hear all of these great stories.
Yeah.
So let's take this one. This is one of my favorites about Lorenzo Snow, fifth president of the church. There's a story of a Protestant minister who met President Lorenzo Snow. Without knowing who he was, the Reverend, Dr. Prentice, later wrote that he had never felt such an overwhelming sense of holiness from another man, as though Snow carried a divine presence. Prentice observed, quote, "When I was introduced to President Lorenzo Snow, I was startled to see the holiest face but one I had ever been privileged to look upon. His face was a poem of peace. His presence was a benediction of peace. The strangest feeling stole over me that I stood on holy ground. The picture of that slight venerable form, hollowed with the aura of an ineffable peace, will haunt my heart like the vision of a celestial picture." Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
He was a poet too, apparently, but I think he's very sincere.
A mantle with them, and I think that's very I think it's evident to even people who are not members of the church. Because
Yeah.
I mean, there's just a feeling that you get when the prophet enters into general conference, for example,
Hmm.
right? And actually, this goes back to something really interesting because you could feel that same mantle with my mission president. I had the opportunity to work in the mission offices for a brief while, and
Yeah.
actually the mission president's wife as well. But you could always tell when they had entered into the mission offices from their home because they had this mantle. And before you even saw them or heard them, you could feel this change come over within the room.
Hmm.
And that's a testimony that I've carried my entire life of the mission presidents and their mantle that they do carry. And and at the same time, it taught me to recognize the Holy Spirit as well, because it's that same I don't know, like descent. I don't know, like a descent of the Holy Spirit into the room. It fills the room. So,
Yeah, and I can say I understand exactly what you mean.
mhm,
I had a similar experience, only one like it. I've lived most of my life in Washington and Colorado and a little in Idaho. So I haven't had the privilege of being around general authorities of the church.
yeah,
However, back home in Washington, where I grew up, my stake president once was called to move his family to Utah because he was joining the Quorum of the 70, one of the quorums of the 70. So this was really exciting. And at state conference that year, he addressed the crowd as kind of a farewell, gave a wonderful talk, and at the end, everybody's mingling around, and I'm talking with some friends. But I remember distinctly having this um, quite a powerful feeling that there was some presence behind me. This almost like there was this light, a sun, a
a warmth. Yeah.
warmth, energy, uh, right behind me, and I felt it before I was aware of anyone else. But I I remember distinctly thinking, I what is that? I need to know what that is. And I turn around, and the stake president, who had just become a 70, was standing there behind me talking with some other people, some other folks.
Hmm.
And um, and I could feel that it was coming from him, and I was like, wow, I have never felt anything like that from another person. And I imagine that must be something similar to what Dr. Prentice felt when he met Lorenzo Snow, or what you felt when you had your mission president
Yeah.
come in.
I would say repeatedly that the Holy Spirit does feel like an external source of energy or sunlight. Yeah.
And it's that very kind of energy that I guess kind of got into my theory of spiritual world, the IRF, the
Yeah.
intelligence resonance field.
Hmm. It's really cool that we're talking about this. I really enjoy this.
They're such great topic to discuss, and it's edifying, isn't it? It's
Hmm. Well, yeah. And
and
if we don't talk
inspiring.
about, like, and this is something that I've brought up on the show over and over again, is if, so there's like this common, and this might be a tangent, I might just remove this, but there's this common thread in LDS talks, or it's kind of like this, I think it's a false tradition, where we say that for everybody, it's a little different. And I'm like, okay, well, that may be true, right? It may be true that everybody
Right.
feels the Spirit a little bit differently. However, it must be more similar than it is dissimilar.
I
Because
agree.
if it were different, we wouldn't have any way to communicate with one another what it's like.
Yeah.
So it would be useless. It would be like if somebody over here is feeling the Spirit in one way and then the other person has a completely different spirit even. That's an indication that it's false, in my opinion. But
Yeah, it's definitely good to think about. And I
yeah.
agree that, I mean, we have that Old Testament scripture, that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if he's always projecting the same energies, then they should be able to be felt
Similar.
in more similar than dissimilar.
Yeah. Anyway, let's continue then from
Sure.
that tangent. But
That
but
was
yeah,
good,
that
yeah.
was what's the next story that you have for us?
Well, I've got just a spattering of short ones that
Okay,
are
good.
kind of fun. So let's look at a few here. We've got The Dream That Led to Escape, a Pioneer Woman's Warning from 1850s. This is again from the Pioneer Journeys. Says a pioneer woman in the Willie Handcart Company. We all know that story. It's an unfortunate story. But in this case, this woman had a prophetic dream warning her that her family needed to leave their camp early the next morning.
Mm.
She obeyed, urging her family ahead of the group. Later, they learned that the section of the trail they had avoided had been hit by a sudden snowstorm, causing immense suffering. The dream had saved their lives.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah. In another case, the visitation of a departed mother. I love this story from 1890 in Idaho. It says a woman in Idaho grieving the loss of her mother um, prayed desperately for comfort. One night, her mother appeared to her in a dream, surrounded by light, and spoke words of love, encouragement, and faith.
Hmm.
When the woman awoke the next morning, she found a small handkerchief embroidered with her mother's initials on her nightstand.
Hmm.
This same handkerchief had been buried with her mother.
Oh. Wow.
Interesting. Huh?
Yeah, that brings up some questions about the possibility of resurrected beings
Yes,
because
truly.
of the fact that it's a physical object that
Graves being opened, and
yeah.
there's that. I don't know how many other people think about this, but you wonder if you're buried in a certain manner, is it going to be hard for your body to get out of it?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a horrifying thought, but
I think it doesn't matter,
probably not.
because you I think there's a transmutation where you don't. It doesn't matter where your body is or what state it is. You're going to be renewed, and you can be wherever you need to be.
Yeah.
And so
And brought up out of the
you
ground
don't
even
get
without
stuck.
disturbing the
Right.
earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, again, things nobody thinks about, or at least nobody talks about. Maybe they think about, they don't talk about.
Yeah.
Right. Certainly, you didn't get talks like this in Sunday school. That's for sure.
Hmm.
But here's one from Spain in the 1980s. This is a great one. A young LDS missionary in Spain struggling with the language was unexpectedly called to give a talk in Spanish in a local branch.
Hmm.
He prayed for help and, in his amazement, spoke fluently for 15 minutes.
Hmm.
Afterwards, multiple members asked how long he had lived in Spain. He was stunned. He had never spoken Spanish that well before, nor could he afterwards. He
Hmm.
knew the gift of tongues had been granted him in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Just an interesting, a different concept of the gift of tongues in the Latter-day Saint tradition.
Mhm.
It's the correct way, I believe.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, you got to have people to be able to interpret what's being said. Otherwise, what's the point of having
Yeah.
tongues? It's just nonsense.
Exactly.
Now, here's another from Utah in the 1870s, the healing of a blind girl. It says a young girl in a Utah settlement lost her sight after an illness. Her mother, full of faith, called upon the elders of the church to administer a priesthood blessing. As they anointed her with oil, she suddenly cried out that she could see again. Her vision was restored instantly. This miraculous healing became a well-known story in their community.
Hmm.
So, something that Cleon Skousen liked to use as his analogy to describe how spirit energy interacts with physical matter and changes is he references Christ's miracle of turning water into wine.
Yeah.
And I like the way that he puts it. He says, well, how does this happen? How does the water become wine? Well, in Doctrine and Covenants, we learn that God's power is his honor, right? My power is my honor, it says. And so what is suggesting is that, again, if intelligence is spirit and all things are made up of matter that is in some form or another, and all matter has intelligence in it, has spirit in it,
Mm-hmm.
then all Christ has to do, is speak to the intelligences within these objects, and they honor their master. They recognize his voice and honor the request by simply reorganizing themselves.
Hmm.
That little intelligence of spirit energy in there reforms and becomes what is required, and they do so because of honor.
Interesting. So very much like the the crystalline frozen crystals of water turn
Hey,
differently.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And likewise, when we perform priesthood blessings of comfort or healing, it's this it no matter what kind of blessing you're giving, it's the same thing. You are invoking the authority of Jesus Christ and the Father, and acting on their behalf in that moment, uh, bringing their power into the world, to be manifest in whatever way that is appropriate. And so when we are giving priesthood blessings, we have to understand that we are acting as if Christ were here. And as we do that, the intelligences within creation are acknowledging or not acknowledging according to our preparedness and our worthiness to stand as a representative of Christ.
Yeah. Well, and then just what you just said brought to mind that scripture that says that the principles of the priesthood are brothers kindness, love, charity, patience, you know,
Yep.
just all those characteristics that through which the priesthood operates.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's very interesting to consider what we've been talking about and tying it back into those experiments. Just the well, and yeah, and then the Fox experiment. The Fox experiment didn't happen immediately, but through patience, the
Yep.
the
Reinforcement
transformation came
of
about. Yeah.
of love and goodness and kindness. Yeah, and they have physical changes that we can actually observe
Hmm.
happening, and it's an amazing thing. Just like this blind girl being healed, and so many other healings that. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, I'm aware of at least 13 well documented accounts of people being raised from the dead. How does that happen? It happens because of that spiritual connection and the fact that things are eternal.
Hmm.
They continue on. We continue on, and it's just in different states, and we can change into those different states depending on certain forces acting with us or against us.
Yeah. Well, that's really amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us today, Ryan. Is Are there any remarks that you'd like to close with?
Sure. I think it'd be nice to close with maybe two more short stories,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
and and um, and these are going to be really good to kind of touch up and round things out. This last one about a general spiritual experience, I think, is just really touching, and it has to do with a soldier from World War II. So I'll do that, and then I've got one from the Book of Mormon, I think, that'll tie it all together.
Okay.
So this one first, a Latter-day Saint soldier during World War II was pinned down by enemy fire. Just as he prepared to make a run for cover, he saw a man in a uniform from an earlier war who waved him forward. Following the figure's gesture, the soldier ran in a different direction and avoided an explosion.
Hmm.
Later, he saw a picture of his great-grandfather, a veteran of the American Civil War, and recognized him as the man who had saved his life.
Wow.
Very cool story, right? So I
Yeah.
love those stories. There's so many like that, and there's some really good books that have been written on the subject. But the last thing that I want to share then is about King Lamoni from the Book of Alma.
Hmm.
I I absolutely love, and have long been fascinated by King Lamoni's story. He was unaware that there was a God, a creator. Well, he knew that there was a great being, a great
Mhm.
spirit, but he didn't really know anything else about it and wasn't connected to it until Ammon, the missionary, came along and taught him. And what I find fascinating is King Lamoni was so enamored by the teaching that Ammon was able to give him, and he wanted to know this God, the Father, so much that his first prayer was this: God, if there is a God, and if thou art God, will you make yourself known to me? And then he says this: and I will give all of my sins to know thee. And then, of course, he had an amazing, deep, profound spiritual experience that not only affected and changed his life, but the life of his entire kingdom.
Hmm.
So, um, what is he really getting at, and what is all of these accounts telling us? It suggests to us that we can become more in tune with this intelligence resonance theory, this spiritual nature, these. morphic fields or whatever you want to call it, we can align ourselves. And for Lamoni, it was about surrendering his knowledge, even his kingdom. What does it mean to give all of my sins to know you? Right? He's suggesting that none of the things that are in his life now matter more than knowing God, and to know him as life eternal, right? So he's saying, as a king, as a ruler, his intelligence, his beliefs, his understandings about the world, his position, his authority, his power, none of it matters. And he's willing to give it all up to know God. And so I have a question for our audience then. What might be holding you back? And are there things that aren't so important that you think maybe are important, but are not so important as knowing God? And are you willing to sacrifice the natural man, give up these other things that are going on in your world, in your life, for the potential to have something so much greater going on in your life and affecting all those around you for the better? And I guess that's my testimony, that is the case, that you can have that, and they do affect you for the better. And it can be hard to give up the things that we think are important. And it gets us to question, what are we doing with our time and our energies? Who are we spending time with? And isn't this why the church teaches us about avoiding certain things? Like, we don't need to be spending time watching R-rated movies. There's types of music that maybe are not uplifting, and can actually be having a detrimental effect without you realizing it. They may seem innocent enough, but again, consider the theories that we've talked about today, and how even small shifts in intention and emotion and words can actually have a profound impact on us. Maybe not in a physical way right away, or anything that we're aware of physically, but certainly on a spiritual level that may be just under the surface.
Yeah.
That's what I got to share with you today.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. I think that a lot of the mental health issues that many of us are facing now in our modern society have a lot to do with the media that we're consuming on our cell phones. And yeah, just the amount of time that we spend, and the content that we've been consuming in such little increments. And by degrees, we're led away by flaxen cords.
Yes,
So,
perfect.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for sharing that. Again, your book is called The Saints Who Built America, and I'm glad that we were able to tie that book back into what we were talking about today, how the Latter-day Saints have changed the United States in such profound ways, and written history in such profound ways, might have to do with how we view metaphysics and how we view spirituality, and how that connects to the physical world. So
absolutely, I certainly think so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, again. And until next time, you guys. Oh, wait, before we go, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Our goal is to reach 20,000 subscribers in 3 months. So make sure to do that.
We can
evangelize these important messages all over the YouTube algorithm. All right. Thank you so much. And until next time, guys. Bye.